After being abducted by a spacecraft, a NASA engineer decides to publicize the existence of extraterrestrial beings and becomes the target of an alien research agency. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, Proximity, from 2020. In 1979, in Alaska, an unidentified flying object flies over a forest and overturns a pickup truck, which suddenly begins to levitate. During the accident, Carl is in the back vehicle and gets out of his car to check that his coworkers are okay, but ends up being chased by the ship and has to flee. Minutes later, he is hit by a beam of blue light and his body is paralyzed. That day, Carl and the 3 lumberjacks in the truck were abducted. A few decades later, at a NASA research center in California, Isaac Cypress, an employee of the technology department, receives data from one of the satellites whose origin is completely unknown. Although he enjoys his work, the engineer feels empty and his whole life comes down to the research he does in his laboratory. To try to change this, he goes to therapy with a psychologist who advises him to keep a video diary. Every day, for at least 5 minutes, Isaac must sit in front of a camera and say everything he is thinking and feeling. Even though he doesn't like the idea very much, he decides to follow the advice of his psychologist, because he knows that expressing his feelings is an important step in clearing his mind. So, in the days following this appointment, he began to record all his thoughts and, one Saturday, he decided to go hiking. His plan is to go to the middle of the forest to connect with nature and let his thoughts flow in order to make the recording. That day, while Isaac is making some recordings on top of a mountain, he spots an asteroid coming towards the planet. The fireball is huge and attracts the attention of everyone in the city because of the impact it makes when it hits the ground. Minutes later, the authorities are on their way to the scene and Isaac hides from the military so that he won't be taken back to the city, as he wants to have the chance to investigate the phenomenon. As soon as he finds a way to escape, he runs towards the asteroid and discovers that the object is actually an alien ship. Immediately, the young man picks up his camera in order to use it to record some images, but suddenly the spaceship disappears without a trace. Just then, Isaac senses a presence a few meters away and, when he looks back, he sees a seemingly harmless humanoid creature. When the alien leaves, the engineer runs off in the opposite direction and wakes up 3 days later on another part of the mountain. When he gets home, Isaac feels that something different has happened to his body, as his arm is very sore. That day, he realizes that he has acquired the ability to make things disappear and wonders how this is possible. The next morning, the young man decides to go to the doctor and discovers that he has a microfracture in his arm, as thin as a hair. As Isaac has never broken his arm before, the doctor is curious to find out what happened there, as the bone seems to have been cut thoroughly and is already healed. The engineer then goes to work and decides to show off his new skills to Beck, one of the members of his team. After making the glass disappear, he feels relieved because he has proof that he is not going mad. However, the truth is that the object has only disappeared for Isaac, as Beck can still see it perfectly. So Isaac decides to show the recordings he made on the mountain and his coworker begins to wonder if the images are real. Then Greta appears and informs them that the remains of the alien ship that arrived on Earth last Saturday have disappeared. Determined to show the world that extraterrestrials really do exist, Isaac posts the video on the internet and, in no time, his recording reaches thousands of views. The next day, the engineer receives a call from Christine, who works for the KFLA newspaper, and the woman invites him for an interview. The journalist asks her guest to give details of the abduction he claims to have suffered and he tells her that he fled in the opposite direction after seeing the alien. Suddenly, his body jerked and Isaac felt as if he had been run over. 3 days later, he woke up in another part of the forest without remembering anything at all. Upon hearing this story, Christine claims that the young man works as a computer engineer at NASA and insinuates that he created that video on his computer to convince people that there is life outside of Earth. After this national exposure, Isaac became the target of several criticisms on the internet and people's opinions are divided between those who believe that the young man was telling the truth and those who claim that it was all just an edited video. In an attempt to prove that he is telling the truth, Isaac starts looking for other people who have gone through the same abduction experience and finds Sarah on the internet. While waiting for the girl in a cafeteria, he has the feeling that the objects around him are floating, but when the waitress arrives to take his order, the engineer realizes that it's all a figment of his mind. Sarah then appears and reveals that she is still confused about what happened to her. The young woman doesn't know if her abduction was real or something created by her imagination, so Isaac shows her several ancient records that prove the existence of alien spaceships. As well as paintings, there are also records of signals that were received by a radio tower that was built by Nikola Tesla. In 1969, during the Apollo 11 space mission, astronaut Buzz Aldrin secretly said that his team observed a floating object through the window, but no one was able to identify it. Seeing all that evidence, Sarah tells him about the case of a guy who was abducted in Alaska in 1979 and 3 witnesses were identified. After telling this story, Carl Meissner disappeared and, before saying goodbye to Sarah, Isaac gave her his phone number so that she could contact him if she found any more relevant information. That night, the young woman calls Isaac and reveals that she has found the full story of what happened to Carl. He and 3 other colleagues were chopping wood in the forest and, on their way home, the group came across a huge floating saucer. Carl then saw a bluish light coming from the ship and he was sucked inside. Eager to find out more about the existence of aliens, Isaac gets the addresses of several people who claim to have been abducted and sends each of them a tape containing the footage he took. That day, he meets Keith Oberman, the writer of a blog who says he wants to help him publicize his story. The man hands Isaac his card and asks the engineer to get in touch if he wants the opportunity to tell his side of the story. Tired of seeing his name besmirched in the media, the young man decides to pay a visit to Keith's office and the journalist suggests that he take a lie detector test to prove that he is telling the truth, as this will be used as proof of the veracity of his story. Isaac readily agrees to take the test, so Keith takes a polygraph and then asks him a series of questions. When he realizes that the engineer is telling the truth about having had an encounter with an alien, Keith leaves the room and calls 2 security guards to arrest him. Frightened, Isaac tries to run away, but is shot and ends up being captured. When he wakes up, he realizes he's in a containment room and sees Sarah being taken to another room. On TV, he receives a message from Keith, who is actually called William Graves. The man is an agent of the International Space Research Program who has arrested him in order to carry out some tests. At the end of the message, various objects are placed in front of Isaac and Graves asks him to concentrate, but the objects don't change at all. As the tranquilizer wears off, Isaac becomes restless and asks where Sarah has been taken. As his questions are completely ignored, he refuses to cooperate and discovers that those people are looking for Carl Meissner. Then, determined to get out of that place, Isaac manages to free himself and attacks the robots that have come to stop him. Soon afterwards, he sets out to find Sarah and, after freeing her, they both try to escape, but are chased by 2 other robots, who start shooting at the fugitives. With his new powers, Isaac manages to open the door that leads to the corridor and, when they reach the end of it, the couple come across a forest. It's not long before they realize they've been taken to Costa Rica and Graves sends an army after them. As the 2 youngsters have trackers, the agent orders his men to follow them, as he believes the pair know where Carl is. Meanwhile, Sarah and Isaac walk through the forest looking for help and meet a restaurant attendant, who tells them about an establishment where the couple can get internet access. After a long walk, they meet Zed and ask for his help to find Carl. Just then, the robots sent by Agent Graves appear and enter the restaurant. Realizing that the youngsters are in trouble, Zed decides to help them escape and guides them to his private hideout. The young man is a hacker who lives as a nomad and claims that no one will track them while they are in that house. While Zed is looking for Carl's location, Isaac asks Sarah to explain what her abduction experience was like and the young woman tells him that she was in a cabin in the mountains with her aunt and uncle, but they went out at night to meet some friends. While she was in the hut alone, Sarah heard a noise coming from outside and, when she went to look out of the window, she saw something gliding in the sky. The next morning, when she met her aunt and uncle again, they were terrified and told her that she had been missing for 2 days. Sarah doesn't remember anything about what happened and, when she went to do some research, she found other people who had had similar experiences. Only then did the young woman realize that she wasn't going mad, because everyone around her was saying that she was making up that story. After a long search, Zed manages to find Carl's address, who now lives in Canada. The young man then makes a video call so that Isaac can get in touch with the old man and he reveals that he has received an answer signal from one of NASA's satellites. Immediately, the engineer sends a download of this signal to Carl and the man manages to decode the message that tells him exactly the day and place where the alien ship that is arriving on Earth will land. After discovering that a UFO will arrive in 5 days, Carl begins to prepare to receive it and advises Isaac to get rid of his electronic devices, because the ISRP agents won't rest until they find him. He then hangs up the call and Isaac can no longer get in touch with him. So he decides to go to Canada and asks Sarah to accompany him on the trip. Excited about the possibility of seeing an alien in person, Zed asks permission to go with them and, that same day, the trio begin their journey. Since they can't travel by plane to avoid detection, they hitchhike on the road and then travel by boat until they reach the border between the 2 countries. Finally, Zed manages to hire a small private plane to take them to Canada, while Agent Graves follows the every move of the 2 fugitives and sends his robots after them. Once on Canadian soil, the 3 youngsters take a train to get as close as possible to the cabin where Carl is hiding. During the trip, Zed takes care of the security and description of his team, but when he looks out of the window, he spots the ISRP police and warns his friends that they are being followed. Suddenly, the robots appear inside the train and the trio have to flee, without even imagining that they have been found by trackers. When they reach the other carriage, everyone wears masks to confuse the androids, who detect their targets through facial recognition. However, the plan doesn't work as expected and robots try to fire tranquilizer darts at the team. Luckily, they manage to escape without being hit and decide to escape through the roof. When the robots try to pursue their targets, they come across Zed, who was hiding in the space between the wagons. The hacker was just waiting for the androids to appear so he could attack them and manages to push the enemies off the train. When they arrive at the station, the fugitives hitch a ride with a man who has stopped to fill up his car and finally reach their destination. Seeing those young people approaching through the security camera, Carl appears and is ready to eliminate them. However, when Isaac introduces himself, the man drops his gun and picks up a device to deactivate the trackers, as he knows that the ISRP inserts tracking devices into all its guinea pigs. There are only 2 days until the aliens arrive, so Carl decides to shelter them in his cabin. The old man says that he was also taken by the ISRP and, after managing to get rid of them, started living in hiding in the middle of the bush. Over the last few decades, he has dedicated his efforts to making contact with the aliens and has become obsessed with finding out what they were looking for on Earth. During his research, Carl learned to decode their language and reveals that the signal Isaac received was the most detailed he had ever seen. Impressed by all the high-tech equipment that the old man manages to keep running in that hut in the middle of nowhere, Zed observes everything carefully and tries to learn as much as possible. He is amazed to learn that a woodcutter was able to create something so great as to be able to decrypt any kind of message. Meanwhile, Isaac and Sarah go out to watch the sunset and the young woman asks how her friend managed to rescue her from the room where she was being held at the ISRP base. To escape, Isaac had to open an extremely heavy steel door and Sarah never understood how he was able to do it. She says she also feels different since the day she was abducted and begins to believe that perhaps the agents were right about them being exposed to something that modified their DNA. The couple's main objective in finding the aliens is to get answers about what actually happened during the time they were missing, as neither of them remembers what was done to them. That afternoon, when Isaac returns to the house, Carl calls him in for a chat and tells him that the young man must be ready for whatever happens the next day, as there is no guarantee that this experience will be good or bad. In the early hours of the morning, Sarah gets anxious and can't sleep, so she asks Isaac to keep her company. The pair wonder why they have been chosen to undergo this experience and question whether there is any reason for it or whether they have just been drawn at random. At a certain point in the conversation, the young man realizes that his friend is asleep and decides to let her rest. The next day, the group is on duty awaiting the arrival of the alien ship when suddenly the earth begins to shake. At that moment, Isaac opens the door and decides to walk through the forest in search of the spaceship. Minutes later, the young man senses the presence of an alien behind him, just like the day he was abducted. However, this time, instead of fleeing in the opposite direction, he decided to stay and try to make contact with the creature. E.T. willingly accompanies him to Carl's hut and uses the translation equipment to communicate with the humans. When questioned about the reason for the abduction, the creature reveals that its species has already conquered science, technology and medicine. Now, they are searching for the origin of the universe and conducting research with humans because this race possesses a large amount of aura, which lives inside their bodies. The alien then uses telepathy to communicate with Isaac and asks him who the man humans know as Jesus Christ is. According to the alien, this being is the link to the origin of everything. After answering the alien's question, Sarah asks why her arm has been hurting since the day she was taken. At that moment, the alien puts a bracelet on the young woman's forearm and removes the tracking device that was implanted there. The same procedure is then carried out on Isaac and the creature tells him that the young man's efforts to collect evidence about the existence of beings from another planet are futile. For humans, it is necessary to see in order to believe, but for beings from other dimensions, believing is the only way to see something. Suddenly, the security system installed by Carl warns of a possible break-in and, soon after, ISRP agents surround the hut. With his rifle in hand, the old man looks out of the window and discovers that, even after deactivating the tracking devices, Graves has managed to find the location of those young people. Using a megaphone, the man contacts Carl and orders him to leave the cabin. The agent's main objective is to interrogate him to find out what happened to Ronald Graves. Just then, Carl appears with a gun and claims not to know what happened to William Graves' father. Ronald was one of the men in the truck on the day Carl was abducted, but he was the only one who didn't return and his son has been searching for answers ever since. Despite wanting to tell him the truth, Carl doesn't really know why his friend wasn't returned with the others, but Agent Graves doesn't believe it. Furious, he orders his companions to shoot the old man, and Sarah despairs when she sees Carl's body lying on the ground. She then becomes the next target and is also eliminated. When he realizes that the young woman has been injured, Isaac is furious and the alien advises him to rely on his senses to save his friends. After saying this, the creatures leave and leave the young man to deal with the situation on his own. Thanks to the powers he acquired after his abduction, Isaac is able to slow down time and rescue his friends. After grabbing Sarah, he turns invisible and takes the young woman to safety. Soon after, he returns to pick up Carl and Zed, who was about to be shot. When Graves realizes that Isaac and the others have disappeared, it's already too late, as they have managed to escape through the back door of the cabin and have used invisibility to slip past the police without their presence being noticed. The group then hitches a ride with their new alien friends, and Agent Graves is shocked to find a flying saucer flying over the forest and disappearing in a blink. 6 months have passed and Sarah and Isaac have become a couple. Now, they are trying to maintain a normal life and live on an island paradise together with the local population. Zed and Carl started working together and decided to found a new technological intelligence agency called Zuma, where they work remotely. After all that he had done out of personal interest, Agent Graves was fired from the ISRP and the group he had persecuted was finally able to live in peace. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.